Hey guys, welcome back to Total Tactics Football. It's Fran here, and I'll be guiding you through once again the round of 16 team selection process. But this video is geared towards users who still have their wildcard chip remaining. So the idea, when compared to the previous video that I made, is more so that you have the ability to kind of invest fully into teams that you think will perform well in the round of 16. A good example of this is, for example, me picking Pickford in the previous video. I picked Pickford because I think if they can get through Germany, then Pickford becomes a good asset for the rest of the tournament. And I don't really have to necessarily rotate him. Whereas a lot of people were probably thinking about Donnarumma. But maybe going Donnarumma means that you go into four Italian players, and that's a little bit of a tricky situation, right? Because if you have, let's say, two Belgian players and four Italian players, and you have no chips remaining, when let's say they face off, and let's say if Italy get knocked out by Belgium, then you could be in a situation where you've lost four Italian players and you have to spend most of your free transfers trying to replace those players specifically. So I think it's worth, if you have no chips remaining, to think about what the rest of the tournament will look like in terms of the bracket. And I've discussed that in the other video, which you can look if you do not have chips remaining. However, as I say, this video is for the people with wildcard chips remaining. I think the idea is simply to look at teams who have easy round of 16 matches. Of course, easy is not something I'm 100% sure on. We can only make estimations for teams, and inevitably, I think there'll be upsets. This is international football. More than likely or not, we'll see one or two big upsets compared to our initial expectations. But I think looking at the games, it's clear that, in my opinion, that most of your team, if you have a wildcard chip remaining for the round of eight, is to look at Italian players and Netherlands players as a priority. And I think you then have the opportunity to potentially look at some differentials as well, some key premium players. Kevin De Bruyne is a good example one, and I'll kind of explain why statistically later. But I think France as well have a relatively easy game. And despite, I think, people's initial expectations, I think Sweden have a nice game as well. And so do Denmark, you know. So I think most of my team will be comprised of the teams that I think have easier games. And as a result, I've come up with a team that consists of a similar front line to the previous video, simply because I think you have the option here to go for penalty takers. When we look at Benzema, for example, I think he's the only asset I would pick for France, even though they're against the Switzerland side. The reason why is because I think this French defense has shown a little bit of a tendency to still get caught in transition, especially due to the fact that I think they've been struggling with the rotation of the fullbacks. And I think as well, they've also not really taken their chances, this French team. It also becomes incredibly hard to actually pick French players because I think someone like Pogba is a brilliant visionary player, but is good for an assist, right? But priced at 8.5 makes him tricky to put on the field. And they have less options in terms of their bench right now with Ousmane Dembele out. And then you also have the issue, of course, of correctly picking between Benzema, Mbappe, and Griezmann, and that's always troublesome. For me, I would pick Benzema given the fact that he seems to be nailed on pens, and international football right now, that seems to be what can kind of lead a team to victory, right? Like getting that kind of crucial penalty, depending on a referee call, and we saw that yesterday with Mbappe. I think moving on, the Italian team, of course, for me is that kind of priority, right? They have a game versus Austria, and I think we've shown and seen as well that Austria struggles versus a team that can kind of transition quickly from defense to attack, which I think Italy are actually the best team in the tournament on, with exception to maybe France when they have individual flair kind of shown between, let's say, someone like Pogba. But I think the kind of quick transitions is something that Austria struggles with, and Italy are one of the greatest teams in the tournament so far who've been able to pull that off. And I think for that reason, you want to actually go for four Italian players. And the fact that I think Netherlands also managed to bag a clean sheet versus Austria shows you that there's strong potential, in my opinion, to actually go for, a double up of the Italian defense, very much so like we've done previously in the group stages. But the great option here is we get to pick, two attacking options for Italy as well. I think some people will be looking at picks like Locatelli and Verratti, and it might be interesting, but I think they're somewhat traps because I still feel that Insigne, Berardi, and Immobile are that kind of attacking trident and will be the ones more involved in goals and assists. Now, of course, things can change and something crazy can happen. I think Barella as well is someone who's probably the more attacking midfielder as well. But I think Immobile and Berardi are my picks here, given the fact that Berardi is priced so well. And, Immobile has had a great tournament so far. I think people seem to forget as well that Italy are the only team that completely rotated their side, with exception to some of the defenders and the goalkeeper. And for that reason, I think that's the only reason why Immobile isn't scoring high on points right now. But on a kind of per minute basis. I think he's an extremely valuable asset. And I think Depay as well has continued to kind of brush up in that form when we look at the Netherlands. The Netherlands have been a massive team in terms of their improvement, I think, over the last week, playing within that kind of five-back structure that De Boer has introduced into the system. And I think we've seen them kind of shore up their kind of transitions, from defense to attack. They're one of the teams that I think commit a lot of personnel forwards. And I think the Czech Republic will unfortunately falter to that because I don't think the Czech Republic necessarily can counterattack. I think that this Netherlands team will struggle versus a team like that. But the way their bracket is set out, it might be potential that I think Denmark can hurt them. But right now, when you're looking at the round of 16, I think it's a perfect game for them. And for that reason, I would go for Depay and Wijnaldum and Dumfries. I think the fourth option is an interesting one. You can actually kind of budget down a little bit and go for the Netherlands keeper. But I like Patrick Van Arnholt. I think Van Arnholt, hasn't necessarily provided much in terms of the attacking categories, in terms of goals and assists. But what's interesting as well is Frank de Boer also likes to sub him off after 60 minutes, which means that he could be like a player who can guarantee you a clean sheet, I think, because the Netherlands have only shown a tendency, in my opinion, to concede a little bit later into the game. The Ukraine game being an example, and I think, in my opinion, they have a very solid defense, and it can only really improve like structurally. Sometimes it's just the fact that they lose to those kind of quick counters, but I don't see the potential really for Czech Republic to do that. Their kind of most lethal threat is someone like Patrick Schick, who's not exactly fast and behind, right? So not really too much of something that I'm concerned about that the Netherlands will struggle with because they have great centre backs as well who can deal with set piece plays, which is how Czech Republic usually kind of play off of and kind of create key chances from, with someone like Soufal providing these chances. Moving on, however, I'd like to also to point out to the strength, I think, of just Kevin De Bruyne simply as a player by himself. I think when you look at Kevin De Bruyne's performances, he has clearly lifted Belgium, towards the top, in my opinion, in the last two match days where he was kind of playing a key part. I think when you look at kind of Russia and I think how poor they were as a side defensively, you look at that and compare to how, let's say, Belgium were able to perform versus Denmark without Kevin De Bruyne, and it was night and day. I think Kevin De Bruyne's impact was instantaneous, and he really could have had a 2-goal, 2-assist game in reality. But of course, he was still the difference maker, and I think someone who can still kind of make a difference versus that Portuguese side, because this Portuguese side seems to have improved in the midfield with the introduction of Renato Sanchez, as we saw versus France, but ultimately, I think Kevin De Bruyne is a player who positionally can kind of create mismatches on the field, and there was definitely some weaknesses, with, for example, someone like João Moutinho, or even the right-hand side, where I think they've also lost another key asset and potentially Semedo being injured. So I think Kevin De Bruyne is a fantastic option, and the stats support this once again. Forsberg now is kind of my differential pick, from Sweden. I explained this in the previous video, but Forsberg simply is like that kind of talismanic player for Sweden right now, and he's in fine form. He also seems to have transitioned to becoming the kind of key penalty taker in the side, and that's a huge asset, when you're kind of building for international football. We've seen a lot of penalties in this tournament, and we've also seen, a lot of own goals, ironically. But I think, Forsberg is that kind of key creator in the Swedish side. There's the threat of Isak as well and Kulusevski, but I think Isak unfortunately has kind of underperformed his underlying stats simply because of the fact that the Swedish team doesn't have too much quality. But I think the chances have really been built by Forsberg and kind of his re-emergence into the side and him taking up the reins. So I think I prefer having Forsberg as well. And Kulusevski could once again play a substitution role, but he could be, quintessential to them kind of eventually seeing the victory. Still, though, I would probably like to go with someone who starts the game. So for that reason, I would pick Forsberg. Then my next pick would be actually kind of looking at the Denmark side, because I do think the Denmark versus Wales match is actually favored quite heavily towards Denmark, in my opinion. I think Denmark have shown quite a solid defensive base, even though they've conceded in all three of their games. And I like the kind of attacking style of play they have in terms of the left-hand side and how that's really working. What you have right now is like almost a triangle between Hojbjerg, Maehle, and Damsgaard. And I think Damsgaard, of course, is someone who I quite highly rate at 5.9 million, but Hojbjerg is that kind of option who actually plays a little bit more attacking for this Danish side. He's not really that kind of holding defensive mid player that he is for Spurs. He plays a slightly more offensive role than Delaney, in my opinion. And you can see that in the Belgium game when Hojbjerg had something like 100 touches. And he was the kind of key kind of creative maker when they were kind of faced versus a little bit more of a compact defense in terms of Belgium, who play, a three back. And I think that's a good comparison to what he can kind of provide versus the Wales. And simply, I think Maehle's stats for the tournament in terms of chance creation have been fantastic. He's also provided a goal for himself. And I think this is an opportunity once again to kind of show why he's such a great 4.5 budget option, especially over kind of other assets like Kyer and stuff like that. So for that reason, I really do like this kind of pairing of Denmark players to kind of keep our budget down. Now, the kind of premium defensive pick that I have is Jordi Alba. And of course, Jordi Alba has only managed to kind of bag one assist in the tournament so far, alongside, I think, 2 clean sheets. But the thing about Jordi Alba is, if you've been watching the Spanish games and if you look at the underlying statistics, it's kind of bar none, the chance creation he has on the left. And I think we can see that with Luis Enrique putting the trust in him over Jose Gaya. And for example, Luis Enrique kind of rotating the right back, Marcos Llorente in the third game. It shows that he has the full trust of Luis Enrique, and his partnership with Pedri is what makes him so special. Pedri is someone who can actually find those passes to unlock Jordi Alba in the touchline, in the box, and it's absolutely beautiful to see. I think he's created a lot of chances, and if this Spanish form kind of picks up side in terms of being able to be a little bit more clinical, you can trust Jordi Alba to likely be the reason for why they score. Now, of course, I think this Croatian side as well has the potential to score, but you have to kind of take some gambles here and pick on players who you think can produce something even with a stronger budget. So for me, Jordi Alba is that kind of player. Going back to Sweden, I think the reason why I've picked Olsen as the keeper is because I simply think that Sweden have shown to be one of the most structured and defensively solid sides in the tournament. And for that reason, I've picked Olsen for the kind of Swedish picks. You might also want to kind of rotate Olsen, as I said, into the Netherlands keeper. That's a potential option. And you can maybe drop Van Aanholt for another defender of your liking. But for me, this is the kind of structure that I'd like to play within. If you do actually want to save money and you do actually want to change one of the forwards that I've selected, then for me, what you can actually do is, once again, drop Olsen into the Netherlands keeper, drop Van Aanholt into perhaps a Swedish defender, someone like Lustig, who plays right back for Sweden, and that kind of gives you enough money to actually go into a premium forward. You could also drop Hojbjerg into a complete budget kind of defender, so a midfielder rather, for 4 mil, someone like Colwill from Wales. And that can actually allow you to upgrade to Cristiano Ronaldo if you don't actually like one of these forward picks, or if you want to go to someone like Lukaku. So those are kind of options to keep in mind, but this is my team selection so far if you actually have the wild card saved up for the round of 8, because you don't really have to worry about the fact that these players might not progress. But I think these are the players who are most likely to get you points within that kind of 105 million budget. So good luck on the knockout stages, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Probably going to be a live stream where I recap things closer to the kind of transfer deadline when I review perhaps the lineups of the teams who play on Saturday.